Hey everyone, welcome to How Movies Get Made, featuring filmmaker, author, general creator Dan Mirvish. You even co-created the Slamdance Film Festival, an amazing independent film festival that rivals Sundance literally at the same time in the same location. Thank you for spending the time with me today.
Sure. No, thank you, Adam. Thanks for having me on.
Dan and I talk about filming in remote locations, but also having to record remotely due to the COVID situation. Then we see how the conversation is a pretty similar project to Dan's latest. And lastly, tips on choosing the music for your film. Why don't you talk to us first about your latest project?
The latest film, narrative feature film that I'm doing is called 18 and a Half. It is a 70s era Watergate conspiracy thriller. And we just shot most of it, just did production right before the pandemic hit, and then we had to take a pandemic pause. So I am currently editing the footage that we do have, which is about 80% of the movie. We're shooting way on the tip of Long Island on the North Fork in a town called Greenport, and in a wonderful location called the Silver Sands Motel and Cottages, which is run by my good buddy Terry Keefe, who's one of my producing partners on the film. Cool. And Terry inherited this motel from his grandparents, basically, and runs it with his folks. And it was built in the late 50s and the 60s, and it still looks like a period 1974 motel. And he's really kept it up largely for that purposes. It's a very busy motel, usually during summers, but he rents it out for a lot of music videos and fashion shoots and things like that, but no one's ever shot a feature there. So he said, hey, if you come up with a feature idea, we're closed during the winters. And so came up with this Watergate idea, and then got together with our other friend, Daniel Moya, who you know, Daniel, and Daniel wrote the script based on a story that he and I came up with. And yeah, and it's about the missing 18 and a half minute gap. Or is it missing? Or is it a gap?
We'll have to watch to find out.
You'll have to. Yeah, we'll have to finish shooting it.
Yes, exactly.
So anyway, so we were out there. So it's about like 2.5 or 3 hours outside of New York City.
The production challenges for shooting in more of a remote location like that, how did you overcome some of those, whether it's getting equipment out there or crew, et cetera?
Yeah, so that was probably the biggest challenge, because once we were out there, we were in pretty good shape and went pretty smoothly. But yeah, we, especially from New York, where not everybody has their own cars, as opposed to shooting like in LA, where people sort of generally have their own cars.
Right.
But yeah, getting equipment. So in some cases, we had some of the vendors drive a truck out there, drop things off, and then when 2 weeks were over, they had to drive back out, pick things up. In some cases, we had a PA with a truck that we would rent in New York, but then there was a question: do you rent it for the full run of the 2 weeks, or do you rent it at the beginning? Do you rent it at the end? Mm-hmm. I think there was a passenger van that we kept for the whole run of it. Because
we were for runs and things like that.
For little runs. Yeah.
You filmed in a lot of locations though, like Omaha and other places that don't have quite as much film production as New York, and even what it sounds like this Greenport location. How important has it been having a location that is what we call production friendly?
Well, yeah, I mean, Greenport itself didn't have any equipment or anything, so everything had to come in from New York City, which is 3 hours away, or 2.5 hours away, but at least it's not 8 hours away. Right. When I shot my first film, Omaha the Movie, that's the name of it, and we shot it in Omaha and throughout Nebraska, it wasn't just in Omaha. That was tough because the biggest challenge was that we were shooting film. This is in the early 90s, and we were shooting 35 millimeter. Yeah. And so we had to get dailies back and forth. There was no lab in Omaha. The closest lab was LA, the lab that we were using was Photochem in LA. So we had to figure out, how are we going to ship dailies back and forth? And of course, it doesn't wind up being dailies. It winds up being weeklies, really. And so we wound up doing a product placement deal with American Airlines, their package division, where they gave us free shipping of our dailies back and forth, the negative. And but in exchange, we had to have someone show up at an airport American Airlines counter and hand deliver an American Airlines parcel package to the American counter. Now, this was not in the script. There was an airport scene in the script, but we just thought, oh, we'll have a plane landing. And they're like, no, that's not good enough. Then the passenger division gets all the credit. And so luckily we had been trying to get free food from a bunch of other, restaurants throughout the state. And my producing partner said, had just gotten off the phone with the Red Robin hamburger chain. He goes, oh yeah, the Red Robin will give us, free food for a day. Or like a lunch. And I was like, great. I said, what's the catch? Well, they want their mascot in the movie. I said, mascot? Yeah, a guy in a giant red bird suit, one of their employees. It's like, well, that's weird. So what we did was if you watch that movie now, which you can sort of see it on Amazon Prime, there's a guy in a giant red bird suit delivering an American Airlines parcel package to the American Airlines counter at the beginning of the movie. So you do whatever you need to do to make it happen, no matter where you are. So, but yeah, no, in a remote area, you try to bring extras, you try to bring 2 cameras, 2 sets of batteries, 2, extra microphones. You prepare for the worst, because the worst will happen.
Yeah, it definitely can. And you do talk about some of these anecdotes from your prior productions for everyone else's knowledge in this amazing book, very useful book. I'm plugging shamelessly. Oh, there you go.
Thank you. There
The
it
Cheerful
is. Yeah.
Subversive's Guide to Independent Filmmaking, which you're working on your 2nd edition right now, I hear.
I am, yeah. That's the
during
upside
this time
to the
off.
pandemic, is I just got approved to do a 2nd edition from Focal Press and Rutledge. So, so this way now I can have a whole chapter on how to shoot a film in a global pandemic.
Cool. Well, I'm happy to have a teaser of it here, because I do want to ask you, it's interesting you're making a movie about the Watergate tapes. And the recording of them, but also the listening of them, right?
Yeah.
Listening to them. And the conversation is obviously an important reference for your film. Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation, edited and sound designed by Walter Murch. And they were actually unable to shoot the entire script that they had written, which is about a 158-page script. And usually you've got about a page a minute is the calculation from page to screen time. And it's an under 2-hour movie. So if you do the math, that's under 120 pages would be expected. Apparently, Walter Murch said they only had 1 pickup shot. They shot, but they were cut short on their shooting schedule because of going over budget and whatnot. So I'm curious, I was reading Walter Murch talking about this process of not having all the footage they expected and things, and making those exploratory choices in editing even sooner than being finished. But then once being finished, not having all the things they thought they would have. Your production, which is a little similar in a different way, because different motivation for this pause, right? This global pandemic we're experiencing, and the
we were actually on schedule and on budget,
right? So you could have
up
been
until we weren't,
but you didn't get to. So what are you exploring now with some editing that you might be doing with the film, and how are you approaching that?
Well, we're lucky in one respect, which is that a big part of the plot of the movie is these characters. It's a woman from a White House employee is leaking this tape to a reporter, and they're meeting at this motel to listen to the tape. And so, there's a big climax of the movie where they're listening to the 18.5-minute tape. So we had actually already, even before the whole pandemic thing, the plan was always that the 3 actors that were going to play Nixon, Bob Haldeman, who was his first chief of staff, and Al Haig, his second chief of staff, those 3 actors we were always going to record them in post-production. Probably in a studio, but even before the pandemic, we were thinking of recording them remotely. Just logistically, one's in Oregon, one's in LA, one maybe in New York. So then, good news is, because everyone is doing everything on Zoom, everything is being done remotely, it's actually a little bit easier for us to at least convince the actors and their agents that, doing this remotely is just fine. It's the new normal. So we're going to be doing those sessions in about a week and a half. And every, the actors are all fine to just, do it at their houses. And there's, technology wise, there's kind of no reason not to, but just sort of,
and it's better than not acting at all.
And it's better than not acting. And so availability actually makes them a little, one person actually, right before I got on this call, one of them just dropped out, so we have to cast someone new. But I'm like, you know what, there's a lot of actors not doing anything right now, so this is kind of the perfect time. And there's, you know, and there's a lot of actors that are doing sort of podcasts and voiceovers and radio plays, and you know, there's a lot of that going on now. So it's sort of it's in the ether. So we're sort of at a perfect time to do that part of the project. And honestly, it'll be a lot cheaper, and we don't have to rent studio space now. We know we're going to have to go back and shoot 4 more days, the scenes that we already had scheduled. But the advantage to this is that I can look at the footage that we have and go, oh, wait a minute, if we're coming back anyway, we can be like a big Hollywood movie. Big Hollywood movies always do pickup shots.
Right.
Little budget indie movies don't always do, or rarely do, pickup shots, because you just can't afford to get the crew back together. Well, we know we're going to have to get the crew back together. So this does give us the opportunity to, if we need it, to go back and reshoot something or add a shot here or there that we, you know, for whatever reason we didn't get. Now the good news is, having gone through all the footage now, I can tell you that we actually don't need to reshoot anything. Everything we shot turned, you know, it's exposed right, it's in focus, it's the actors did a great job. So that's the good news, but it gives us that, you know, peace of mind to know that, well, if there's one little shot or one little angle we need to pick up, or an exterior shot or something, we can do it now. I mean, the irony is, a lot of what people are saying is, oh, you've got to go somewhere where the cast and crew can totally self-isolate and self-quarantine and work with a small number of people on set. And, you know, and I'm listening to all this, and, you know, like, this studio people are like, and network people are like, oh my gosh, this is going to be such a change for us, and like not have anyone at Video Village. I'm thinking to myself, that's exactly what we were doing anyway. That is our motive of shooting. Like, we had a tiny crew, had almost nobody at Video. Yeah, there was no Video Village, you know, and we were all self-isolated. You know,
it's almost like this approach that you're taking on this film, but also a lot of approaches that a lot of indie films take, you know, isolating to one location, things like that, is almost benefited by this broken up approach. Like, why not film in chunks anyways? Why do we do it in one spurt?
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's economics of you know, the equipment and insurance and things like that.
But you're saying it's usually on a weekly rate, right? So I'm just like hypothesizing, like, what if we generally just did week-long spurts and had time in between to edit and explore and all that sort of stuff? And record these people, I mean, these actors. And
there's definitely, and there's definitely filmmakers that have done that, either by design or by circumstance. You know, Christopher Nolan's first film, Following, which we showed at Slamdance, he shot that over the course of a year, you know, like one weekend here, one weekend there. And his lead actor's hair changes length the whole movie, you know. So, you know, or Linklater's Boyhood, you know, shot over years. So it certainly can be done that way, and for the right films, it does make more sense.
I want to transition a little bit more to the process that you were intending to do for this film, despite the setbacks. You know, you're telling a story about an audio recording, just like the conversation has an audio recording as a central part of it. I know that they were crafting musical themes and motifs for the film before, during, and after shooting. Have you had relationships with composers like that? What's your process with music usually like?
Yeah, so this is the second film I've done with a great composer named Luis Guerra, who lives really close to me, and our daughters are friends. They went to school together. That's kind of how I know Luis. But he's a really great composer. He does the music to Malcolm Gladwell's podcast, Revisionist History, and the Freakonomics podcast. Yeah. So, but anyway, so he did the music to my last film, Bernard and Huey, and that was great. That's, you know, we did that together, worked closely on that. I think there's one song that we knew in advance was going to be in the movie, and that was a song that I had written years ago. On this one, while we were still in the writing process, I was kind of thinking about tone, you know, what is the tone of the film, and I kind of came up with the idea that there would be sort of a Brazilian bossa nova theme running throughout the thing, and it made sense contextually. There's two characters that have been to Brazil, and listen to bossa nova music. And I had gone to Brazil, to the Sao Paulo International Film Festival, the Mostra, like 2 years ago with my last film. So, I really had a great experience there, and it just kind of sunk in, the Brazilian theme. So, and it was great because Luis knows quite a lot about, he studied film music at University of Texas, Austin. And he really does know quite a lot about bossa nova, and knows a lot of, musicians in LA. There's a lot of Brazilians here, and people that can play that stuff, including him. So,
Right.
So it was kind of he was a really good fit for that style of music, and particularly kind of 70s era, late 60s, early 70s bossa nova. He really knows the history of what instruments they were using, who was playing what, and all that. So there was one particular song that we needed to incorporate into the script. So I wrote the lyrics to it. Luis did the music to it, and that's written into the script. And that was the song that we had this little dance number to. But then even in addition to that song, he was last fall was writing like just temp music for us to use. We used it for our crowdfunding campaign that used music that that he had already written. The music is really a great unifying feature for a movie. Like that's the thing that I think it's very easy to overlook. And I feel very strongly about having a consistent flavor of music in your film. Like I almost never just throw on soundtrack songs. For a lot of reasons, but for both practical and aesthetic reasons. But I think that if you have a narrow group of instruments, just like 5 or 6 consistent instrumentation throughout your whole movie, you'll have a much more impactful soundtrack and a much more kind of unified tone to the whole film that will tie the whole piece together. Because I think that's what the audience remembers. The Third Man had a zither,
right?
And it's like, and you still remember that. I don't know what other films have zithers. So having sort of a unique sound and tone for your film, I think is what makes a score memorable, or part of what makes a score memorable, or a consistent melody, or a consistent, there's other levels of consistency that you can have. And in our film, we use this one song that we go to a couple of times, and lyrically and musically, it plays an important part of the film.
That's really cool. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing it. And as you may be able to tell, for those who are watching, Dan is a treasure trove of knowledge. You should definitely get the second edition of his book when it comes out.
Yes.
To learn more about how his production.
But don't wait. Get it now. Yeah. Get it now.
So this has been How Movies Get Made, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Dan.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks for having me on.